Welcome to the Always Better Than Yesterday podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Hartley. This podcast exists to equip and inspire your heart-centered leadership. Every week, we bring interviews with some of the greatest heart sets and mindsets on the planet. I hope the heartprint of our time spent together is that it creates new possibilities for you and all those you come into contact with. If you'd like to explore what we could make possible for you, then head to abty.co.uk/connect and book in a free 30-minute call to begin our journey together. I just want to express a huge amount of gratitude to our sponsors, Exhale Coffee. I have been a big fan of Exhale Coffee since meeting Alex and the team back in 2022. Exhale is the first coffee to be sourced, roasted and lab tested specifically to maximize its antioxidant and anti-inflammatory potency. An independent lab test has shown that 1 cup of Exhale Coffee has the same antioxidant power as 1.8 kilos of blueberries or 55 oranges. I'm a huge fan, and Mrs. H loves the decaf, especially because she knows that Exhale use the mountain water decaffeination process, which uses only pure glacial water from the highest mountain in Mexico and no nasty chemicals. Simply head to exhalecoffee.com/ABTY for your special offer. And lastly, before I introduce this week's guest, please do subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It would really help us leave a greater heartprint on this world. On episode 265, what an honour it is to welcome Maureen Murdock back to the podcast. Maureen first joined us back in 2022 as we discussed her incredible book, The Heroine's Journey. In this conversation, you're going to hear about Maureen's new book, Mythmaking, Self-Discovery and the Timeless Art of Memoir. I'm really excited for you to hear this conversation. I know how life-giving our previous podcast episode was. This one is going to be more of the same. I hope that you're ready. It's episode 265 with Maureen Murdock. Maureen, welcome back to the Always Better Than Yesterday podcast. How are you?
Oh, I'm okay, Ryan. It's good to see you. Even
We've
been at Disney World.
I know. A couple of weeks ago we went to Orlando with the kids, and I just feel absolutely blessed to share time and space with you because this is the third occasion now. So obviously you were on the podcast back in 2022. We talked about your incredible book, The Heroine's Journey. And then we were really fortunate for you to join our leadership group a couple of weeks ago. I think it's about a month ago now. And it was a real gift for me to be able to bring my team, and allow them to share space and time with you, because it was really powerful. I mean, we've spent time with a lot of people over the years. We've been running the group for about 4 years, and everyone agreed that just after that, it's just like, sometimes you struggle to find words of it, but the way that we would surmise it is that we've spent time and space with someone who is incredibly wise. And I think in the archetypal world, that might be called the sage. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. The wise woman.
The wise one. And we've really felt that. And so I just want you to know how grateful our little master heart and mind group of leaders were, because we really did feel blessed by your presence and the grace with which you showed up. And it was amazing. Where do you point the credit for the sage and the wisdom that you've gained?
Age.
Is it that simple?
Well, age and working with people for such a long time, you gather their wisdom as well. So, and the teachers that I've had some amazing teachers like Marion Woodman and Joseph Campbell and the readings of Jung. And I just, feel very fortunate. So thank you for your comment. I just realized, excuse me, I'm sorry, that you and I were just talking about Disney World, and that's kind of a land of archetypes.
Right. Yeah. Well, and so I've been listening to the work of Jordan Peterson recently, who's well versed in the Jungian archetypes, and the one that really stood out to me was the Peter Pan archetype. That one really stood out to me because there's I've been journeying a lot. We talked about the women and the heroine's journey, And since then, I've been really on this understanding of, well, what's the kind of masculine journey of today? You know, there's a real kind of cultural moment, I think, with the masculine, and there's a lot of boys out there, shall we say, that are Peter Pan-esque in their archetype.
Yeah, the puer. Yeah. And do you think that's true primarily of your generation?
Well, I think a lot of it does come down to a fatherlessness state. The teachings I've shared, great people like John Eldridge, the Christian author of Wild at Heart, he talks about how masculinity is something that you learn from other men, and an understanding to bear the archetype of, you know, I guess the many masculine archetypes, but really like coming into this sense of being a king and using power to, you know, protect and serve people. You know, you can't do that if you're too busy focusing on self and your self pleasure, and, you know, and not bearing those responsibilities. And I think, yeah, some of that does come from, you know, I was a single parent, so my mum, single parent family, and generally the sentiment of, I don't want to generalize too much, but single mothers just want their sons to be happy. They want their sons to be happy. So I didn't get the chastisement that a father might have, you know, crafted my character. Mum just wanted me to be happy, and that meant that my wife, you know, we've been together since 15, had to suffer a boy whilst he was a man. You know, I've had to learn this stuff along the way. So yeah, I don't think I'm alone in this idea of the Peter Pan kind of boy just wants to be happy and fulfill his own pleasures. At some point, he's
And not have to work too hard.
right, or be responsible for anything or anyone else.
Yeah. Well, the archetype of the masculine is to provide and protect. And maybe not having that model, that's hard to build up in yourself.
I love to talk about
when you were just talking about that, I was thinking about one of the archetypes in my book, Mythmaking, Self-Discovery, and the Timeless Art of Memoir, is the, excellent book, is the search for the father by the son, you know, which we see in the myth of Odysseus, where Telemachus goes out, you know, at age 20 to find out, you know, is dad ever going to come home? And he does have the opportunity to actually fight with his father against the suitors for his mother, Penelope. But for 20 years, there was no father because Odysseus went off in the Trojan Wars. And so the memoir that I was looking at that kind of paralleled that is The Duke of Deception. And now I'm going to forget the author's name, but where his father dies and he realizes that all of the tales he told throughout his whole life were lies. That's why it's called The Duke of Deception. Oh, it's by Jeff Wolfe. And he comes to the end of the book saying, I have become my father because I have written his life. And of course, Jeff Wolfe is a writer. So in trying to figure out who his father really was, he actually has become his father. So it's an interesting look at the evolution of the archetype.
I really want to dive into some more of your incredible myth making, self discovery, and the timeless art of memoir. I'm not well versed in memoir. I'm not well versed in, so you have to treat me like a novice, treat me like one of your early day students, because I know you've been teaching this stuff for a long time. one of the things, so I'm not well versed in the Telemachus stuff, but I do understand that there's that period where father's away, and that's the important role of mentor, right? I think he comes across mentor. So we can have really important people along the journey that step in, and you've been a great mentor, shall we say, for many memoirists. Is that what we call them? Memoirists?
Yes, they are memoirists, right? Yeah.
I'd love to, I really love the, setting the scene with like definitions, being clear with what we mean by certain terms. And I read in your book that memoirs aren't to be confused with autobiographies or biographies.
Right.
What is a memoir?
What's a memoir? A memoir is a particular slice of life, which
Hmm.
is written by the author who has lived it from his or her point of view, quite
Mm,
different from autobiography or biography, which usually begins at the beginning of a person's life and goes until they can write it,
mm,
or like Personal History by Catherine Graham, who was the editor of the Washington Post. In a sense, that's the biography and evolution of that particular newspaper. The editors were her father first, then her husband, and then she became editor. She became possibly the most powerful woman, certainly in the United States,
mm,
when her husband dropped dead. So that is usually has more facts and does not usually focus on emotional truth. Um, and memoir is not just a person's individual story, but it does have to have some connection to the universal, to what's going on in the culture,
mm,
to what's going on in the family, what's going on historically.
mm,
Um, in fact, one of my memoir students who's British, she's been writing about her relationship with her mother and her
mhm,
grandmother, and how mothering is so different now than it was 3 generations ago.
mm,
And then all of a sudden she realized, well, both my mother and my grandmother went through world wars.
mm,
So they didn't know how to mother because they went to work at 13 or 14, and how growing up in that historical period had
mm,
such a huge influence on their psyches and on their ability or inability to mother.
mm,
So, what's going on historically and culturally is really important, but it's a person's particular lens. So, what I was looking at in myth-making, self-discovery, and the timeless art of memoir is looking at memoir through a mythic lens.
mm,
Because when I first started teaching it, in the 90s, the early 90s, I realized after, I mean, that I had a relationship with Joseph Campbell, but he was always looking at the domains of myth in terms of who am I, who are my people,
mhm,
what's my journey, and what's my purpose. And the more I listened to memoirs that my students were writing, those themes were repeated over and
mm,
over again. So I started to look at specific memoirs that reflected those themes. Um, and
mm,
it's just fascinating to see the overlap or um, the parallel, because all of them, each one of them has an archetype, which is an invisible primary pattern in the psyche, like the parent-child bond, like we were just talking about Odysseus and Telemachus, or the mother-daughter bond from Demeter and Persephone, or the descent to the underworld,
mm,
like Orestes and Eurydice. So that's
mm,
what I was listening to. And so the more I have seen and read contemporary memoirs, the more I see those themes embedded in the core of the story. The details are completely different, but the real core or heart of the story is right there in myth.
Yeah. And that's why you say with absolute conviction in your book that memoirists are truly contemporary myth makers.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I think it's, and I love the way that you've pieced that together, because I think most people will look at a myth or an archetype and acknowledge it for a story of the past, dragons, and there's a sense of, oh, maybe it's a story of, rather than a truth and reality, like you say, a biography. But when you say that these patterns are still being lived out in the present in form of memoir, it really does make the case for memoir as a form of creative expression.
Oh, absolutely. And also, I find that memoir is very healing,
Mm,
both the writing of it, the reading of it, and hearing your own story read.
mm,
Um, because with memoir, you have to have self reflection. You're not just writing a tale or a memory or a particular period in your life. You're writing about that, but then you're reflecting on it like, what do I know now that I did not know before? And how do I now want to live my life? So it gives people a
mm.
real framework to look at their lives.
It's powerful, isn't it? I know that the last conversation we had, we didn't touch massively on your psychotherapy work, but you say in the book that actually you have encountered more memoirists that have revealed more about their own psyches through memoir than they have therapy. Like, how is that so? How is that possible?
Well, because they really have to do some deep diving
Yeah, right.
and bring up the memory. Bringing up the memory and writing about it
Mm,
is very emotional.
yeah.
I just did a workshop in Santa Fe, and one of the writers in the workshop was saying, you know, I gave them an exercise to write about their first 20 years in 20 minutes. And
Mm,
she was saying, when something is that condensed, you dive pretty deeply to bring it up. And she said, all of a sudden, I realized why my mother was checked out, what was going on in the family and the culture at the time. She said, I've been dealing with mother issues for 20 years in
mm,
therapy and really never got the understanding of the cultural piece. So
mm,
I think that's one of the reasons. I also think when you're writing memoir, you're doing all the work
mm,
rather than the interaction between you and the therapist. I mean, the therapist can reflect, but when you're
mm,
reading your life, you're reflecting on it at a deeper level. But I do see them going hand in hand.
mm. One of the things you said there is around the cultural time, cultural movement, and that's always changing. And are you seeing, being at the forefront of memoir, like the I guess you're seeing the repetitions in the patterns, but are you seeing a change, or shall we say evolution, in the form of memoir?
One thing that I was really surprised with at this workshop I just gave was, I would say, my generation, when we were writing, let's say, about our relationships with
Hmm.
parents, we didn't express much love in our writing. Um, the generation now in 30s and 40s, the women who were writing about their relationships with their mothers were very touching, very deep, very loving. So that's one change on a technical aspect. the younger memoirs now incorporate texts,
Mm.
um, poetry,
Yeah.
animation,
Yeah.
visual images. They're much more creative, I would say.
Yeah.
And they're doing more self-reflection younger.
Right. Right. It's an interesting cultural moment, isn't it? So much we can pick up from social media. Social media is just a sword, right? It depends how you wield it. What do you for good or bad, right? And for people that be able to see this conversation on social media, some people will be able to see other memoirists on social media. That can only be an inspiring ripple effect that's good, right? But what you said earlier around a framework. How do you're an educator of memoirists. How do you take people through a process of birthing their memoirs, bringing them to the world? Is there a certain process? Is there a certain framework? Are there certain hallmarks or key attributes of a memoir that you'd expect to see?
Oh, yeah, there's a lot of elements to memoir writing,
Yeah.
but to begin with, I would say what is psyche wanting you to examine?
Mm.
So what's the first image that keeps coming up? And just going with that, and then getting yourself in the scene of where that image occurs and creating scenes out of sensory description. You've
Mm.
got to you've got to get yourself as well as your reader into the environment into which the particular memory occurs. So no event is too small
Mm.
to write about. It has to have some universal impact as well as a personal impact,
Mm.
because we're just placeholders for everybody else, because we've all had the same desires and dreams and
Mm.
challenges in our lives. So the more that we can write with emotional truth,
Mm.
the better. And then one of the real keys to memoir writing is to develop yourself as a believable character and
Mm.
self-reflection. Like I said before, what do I know now that I didn't know before?
Yeah.
Had I known that before, would I have made the same choices?
Yeah.
What choice would I make now? So it's a depth inquiry.
Yeah.
You're always asking deeper and deeper questions.
Yeah. And this is why you've labeled it self-discovery. You can literally find an essence of self in the universal. It's
Yeah, absolutely.
powerful, isn't it? Powerful.
What's interesting to me, if I'm looking at the domains of myth, who am I?
Mm.
For my people, my journey, and my purpose. The
Hmm.
who am I is the underpinning of memoir writing.
Mm.
Um, and so what I was looking at in that particular chapter is, what emerged out of your birth?
Mm.
What were your beginnings?
Mm.
What's your creation myth? What's your origin story? How does your name affect who you have lived? Like, my name's Maureen. Well, that's Irish for Mary. So, of course, in my culture of Irish American, at this particular time that I was baptized, all the girls are Mary. We're Mary Pat or Mary Catherine. It's all for the Virgin Mary.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that had a huge impact on my life,
Mm.
just the naming.
The book, obviously people are going to go out and get it. The links are in the show notes. And I won't take everyone through the absolute detail, but I do like the structure, which at the end of every chapter you invite people on these writing prompts. There are 5, 6, 7, or 8 questions to prompt people's introspection, when it comes to crafting their own memoir. And there was one particular question that says, which ancient myth or mythological creature do you identify with? I thought, brilliant, here's my opportunity. You're going to channel it. Is it going to be Zeus? Is it going to be like Moses? And the first thing that comes up, Simba. Simba from Simba from the Lion King. And I was like, oh, okay, fine, we've gone there. I'm not very highbrow, I'm not very educated on some of these things. I'm a simple guy. And Lion King is is probably one of the most impactful stories, and just Simba's arc, like his arc story, is just one that deeply resonates for me. Going from this point of, no longer having a father there, finding himself out in exile in the wilderness, not really wanting that responsibility, and then having this moment where he meets the wise Rafiki, gets a bang on the head, and is encouraged and reminded to, remember who he is. Literally has Mufasa coming out of the clouds, remember who you are. And he returns and he becomes king, and he looks after his people. I think it's an incredible hero's arc, and I really resonate with that. But
it's a perfect mythic journey. I mean, you just went through, as you just said, the whole arc from loss to becoming king.
Yeah. It's funny, isn't it? Because they're all hidden in plain sight, and I really pay attention to like words and psyche and mindset and patterns, and there's even a bit where like he's being encouraged to come back, and he's being encouraged to take his rightful place, and he's like, well, that's not me, that's not who I am. He's having this internal battle with his identity. I think that's something we can all resonate with, is that's this internal conflict around who we say we are.
Right. Yeah. Who we say we are to the general public, and then who we really are when we face our story on the page. That's what happens in memoir. We have to, there's one thing about the fact that we all talk about where we came from and who our parents were and what our challenges were, but who are we underneath all of that?
Are there any particular mythological creatures, characters, archetypes that you really resonate with, inspired by?
I've done a lot of thinking about the Demeter Persephone myth, the mother-daughter myth, in terms of looking, when I was writing about it for myself, I was looking at it more in terms of the mother-son myth. Whether it's the son or the daughter, when the child is abducted, like Persephone was, into the underworld by Hades, how does the mother get the child back out? And so, I mean, that's a very complex and wonderful myth, because they are finally united. I was looking at it in terms of my relationship with my son, who was going through a very dark time, and I couldn't do anything to, quote, save him. And I had to realize that I wasn't the mythic Demeter. I was just a human woman who had to accept that his journey was his journey, and that I couldn't really interfere with it. So I think, that was taking the myth and changing it to some degree by the loss of the son rather than the daughter. But so there's that. I've also identified for a long time with Athena, who was the father's daughter, because I had idealized my father, but I had to learn about the price of that. And I didn't really figure that out until I wrote the book, Father's Daughters, Breaking the Ties That Bind. So I've had a good time seeing my life through the lens of different myths.
Yeah. And it's testament to what you said earlier around memoir. It can be both healing for the author and for the reader, because that even just in my small group, the amount of healing that conversation made possible around the father relationship, whether they be present or overbearing or absent or seeking the love of and the valid, it can be healing to have someone find the words for quite often an experience that transcends the intellect.
Yes, and to put it in a larger context, which is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Looking at some of these challenges in our life in a larger mythic context helps us realize we're not alone, and that others have gone through similar things in before we did, and come out the other end. So there's hope. I think it gives everyone hope.
And so much of that hope and connection is often made possible by the dark, the wound, the things we'd rather not have experienced, or because I don't think people are necessarily inspired by successes. Success is plastered everywhere, right? It's in the news, it's on the TV. But I know that people have felt most inspired and deeply connected to each other, myself and other people, at the edges of our vulnerability, at the edges of our wounds. And I think this deep storytelling, this deep ability to put pen to paper and give of yourself as an act of love and as an act of therapy and as an act of creation. And I think it's, and there's a one-liner from your book, it says that so often stories are so compelling because we want to see ourselves reflected in them.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And we can identify with the vulnerability of the other person because we've all been there.
Right.
So it's that identification with the other and wanting to know how they got from there to here. I think we all want a map to help us survive, basically.
So this book is almost a map to bring more of people's memoirs to the world. So the first part of the book is broken down into part one is all about establishing your myth foundation. So we've talked all about like the who am I, who are my people, my journey, my purpose. The second part is all about exploring the archetypal themes. And
I was looking at 5 different archetypes that I saw different memoirs reflected in. One was home and the search for home. One was the body and the wounded body and being known by your wounds. One is exile, being exile or choosing exile. The next was loss. And then the last one was spirituality. So I had chosen those 5 archetypes, and I think not for any particular reason, except I kept reading. I read over 73 memoirs for this book, and so many of them fit those particular archetypes. So that's why I chose those.
Why did spirit?
For me, I was finishing the book. My partner, I think my partner has died since we had our first podcast.
Yeah.
But he was dying as I was finishing the book. So I did not include his loss in that chapter, but I did include Joan Didion's The Year of Magical Thinking because, and she very much reflects the Eurydice myth of the, now I'm forgetting her partner's name, but he made the journey to the underworld to try to bring her back from the underworld. And Joan Didion in The Year of Magical Thinking, that was part of her magical thinking all throughout the year after her husband died, that any moment he's going to walk in the front door, which I think many of us feel when we've lost a loved one, that of course they're going to come back. Of course they're going to come back from the underworld.
I just opened your book on a random page, and of course it opened on the exact chapter of Lost.
Oh, okay.
Page 118. And, you know, it's one of the life's consistent things, isn't it? We're always going to, you know, if we live, you know, live long enough, we're going to experience some loss of some sort. And what does the active memoir do? I don't think it ever, you know, I lost my nan last year, and you know, I have quite a spirituality where I have an acceptance of, you know, that she's off and she's where she is, and but I still feel in my heart at times, even just the thought of her will bring this kind of grief to the surface. So it's so I guess my question is, like, you know, what does the process of memoir do for loss? Does it reconcile it? Does it bring it to this? I've lost the words now. Maybe you could answer on my behalf of what does
Well,
memoir
I
do?
think it does all of the things that you just said. You know, it helps us to honor the person who has passed. It helps us to honor our own grief, like you just said. It never goes away. We just find different ways to live with it. Um, yeah, it's interesting reading about how different people do deal with it, whether it's through writing or dance or music. Or I think one of the things loss does, it cracks us open and helps us deal with our own mortality, you know,
Right.
and purpose. What are we here to do while we have this one wonderful life?
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And one of the real things that kind of came through for me as I was journeying around that time was the book of Ecclesiastes in the Old Testament was really prevalent for me. And a lot of that is that if for listeners that don't know the book of Ecclesiastes, it's this I guess it's written by King Solomon, who just has the luxury of everything. He has the riches of the riches. He has access to all the women. He has access to all the food, all the pleasure, and he concludes that everything's meaningless, which is a paradox, right? Because it's if everything's meaningless, then there's there's a lot of meaning within the meaningless. And the thing I took from that was that it's moments of death and loss that really do bring to the forefront that which is and that which isn't meaningless, that which is meaningful and that which is meaningless. And you know, and I got to that point through maybe we wouldn't be calling you know, the book of Ecclesiastes a memoir, but it certainly was that for me, in terms of I was benefiting from the wisdom of the words written by someone who had experienced what he had experienced.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up because I quote from Elaine Pagels in that chapter on loss, and she's quoting from the Gospel of Thomas.
Right.
Uh,
Yep.
so, in a similar way, actually going to the wise people to understand.
Yeah, absolutely. And the last section of that bit is spirituality. How does that appear? How does spirituality appear in memoir? Are people wrestling with their spirituality, or are they having a breakthrough and experiencing an awakening and oneness? Like, how does it? In your review of 73 memoirs, how did it come through to you?
In relationship, you know,
Right.
whether it's relationship to nature or to a particular deity or
Mm,
to poetry or to animals uh,
mm,
or to other people. It's all about relationship. That's what I discovered, particularly writers about nature. Really beautiful, as opposed to relationship to a divinity,
right.
except for Carol Christ, who wrote a lot about the goddess. She
Mhm.
actually moved to Lesbos, the island of Lesbos, because of the Mycenaean culture that venerated the goddess. And so her writing is all about the relationship to the divine feminine. So that is certainly one example of how someone dealt with their spirituality. Yeah.
Thank you for that. As someone who's written a lot about the relationship between mother, daughter, mother, son, what was it like having your granddaughters review your book?
Oh, that's funny that you brought that up. Well, one of them did a really good job of pointing out areas that I needed to fill in more.
What a gift.
It was a gift. Yeah, and they opened up my perspective. Early 20s, they're in a whole different place of life. But they're both now writers. My oldest granddaughter has gone to work at the New Yorker in New York, and my second granddaughter is graduating from college this particular Saturday and just got the award for the best history thesis. So the writing gene is moving down the line.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Maureen, I don't know if I asked you this question last time you were on, but I asked my guests every guest this question. And the word I have here, always better than yesterday, it's called Heartprint. And the word Heartprint symbolizes the ripple effect, the legacy that we leave in and around us, in others. The origin of the word comes from my time in UK policing. We used to teach our detectives the Locard's exchange principle. It's this idea that every contact leaves a trace. And we used to teach the police officers this because we would get them thinking when they went to a scene to think about where the offender has left of themselves. But I really believe that we're all leaving a trace with every interaction. Every interaction that you and I have had, the new possibilities that maybe this conversation's creating, the one degree of possibility, new thought, new action, new belief. And you've been on this incredible journey. You've put out so much goodness to the world. I'm sure you'll never be able to really comprehend the totality of your ripple effect. But Maureen, I'd just love for you to consider for one moment what you hope your heartprint will be.
Oh, that's lovely. I hope that I've given in both men and women, but particularly women, an understanding of and appreciation for their lives, and hope that they will love each other more and love themselves more. And in terms of memoir, I really would hope that they would allow themselves to follow the first image that occurs and to see where it takes them, and not to feel afraid to write about their own lives, because in writing about their own lives, they will begin to appreciate themselves at a deeper level.
Maureen, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for everything that you do and everything that you are. And I'll make sure that all your links are in the show notes. And yeah, what a gift. And I was going to wrap up with a invitation for you to share a final thought. And I just really want to emphasize that bit you've just said, especially and particularly women. And there's a bit on your website that just says there's a critical stage of the heroine's journey that addresses every woman's yearning to create. And memoir writing is a powerful creative expression of each person's desire to understand their life and the lives of their loved ones.
Oh, thank you.
What an incredible invitation, particularly for the women. And maybe we'll leave a final thought directly for those women whose yearning you are probably stoking in this moment.
A final thought. Grab a pen, grab some paper or a laptop, and write your life. Write what your soul wants to say.
Beautiful. Maureen, bless you. Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. This was fun.
Hey, my friends, thank you for making it to the end. I hope that our time spent together today has left you a little bit better than before you push play. I'd really appreciate if you just took a moment to leave a review to allow me to meet more people where they are and hopefully leave them a little bit better too. If you're curious to know how I, through Always Better Than Yesterday, can serve you, your team, your organisation, then head to alwaysbetterthanyesterday.com to connect. And while you're there, let me know 1 or 2 things that you're going to do as a result of listening to this conversation. I absolutely love hearing your thoughts, your reflections, and the things that this spark in your own heart and mind. If you want more insights from my heart and mind, I do send out short episodes on a Monday, Tuesday, Thursday and Friday, and again, I hope that they serve you well. I appreciate you listening. I'm Ryan Hartley, host of the Always Better Than Yesterday podcast, a podcast for heart-centered leaders just like you. Keep leading, my friends. Always love.